Yeah, please have a seat. So for everyone who's joined us for the closing plenary, thank you so much for being here with us. We are going to officially kick off our closing session. And I think for those of you who are returning, you probably have a sense of how we like to close out. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'll just do some really quick framing of this session. For us, because of how we just think about business within the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, it's so critical to keep youth voice at the center of this work. And so in closing out our plenary, what we really want to do actually is hear from our youth leaders in regard to the lessons they're taking away from them during their time with us here in Aspen. And then coupled with that is the question around the implications for these lessons for their work back home. So we're going to first hear answers from our young people, and then I'm going to ask some people who are sitting together at tables to also share some key reflections to those two questions. But before we kick this off, what I really wanted to do was also honor a group, in particular a young lady, Carmen, from the Youth Build Network, who has this incredible story about her life and this video that I think due to technological difficulties didn't play yesterday. And I told her that we would kick off our closing session by playing this video. I want to Not only do we want to keep our word, but we want to make sure that we lift up Carmen's story as much as we can. So we're going to start off with the video before we transition into the closing plenary.
My brother. This is when life was happy. I'm smiling, he's smiling, life was good. This is my mom holding the both of us. And this is the only time I remember her holding us. For me, growing up, I had a different definition of normal. My mother wasn't mentally or emotionally capable of raising me. She was addicted to crack cocaine, and she was a prostitute. The last time I saw her, she dropped me off at one of her friend's house, me and my brother, and she left us.
Youth Build is a life-changing opportunity for young people who dropped out of high school, who can come back and sort of deal with every aspect of their life and start to really transform their trajectory and their potential. Partnerships are critical for Youth Build Philadelphia. We want to be sure that wherever we do have partnerships, that they care about our students in the same way. It's as personal for them as it is for us.
Partnering with Youth Build was such a natural partnership. We sat down with a group of students and got to hear sort of their backstories, how they came to be in Philadelphia Youth Build. We were really impacted by just the stories of resilience, how these young people care about exactly what we care about. It became very clear that they would make great Starbucks partners.
The day when Starbucks came to Youth Build, I wasn't looking for employment. I just wanted to share my story.
I left the conversation in tears that day. How can she overcome that at 19 years old?
Here at Youth Build Philly, we're not afraid to use the word love. And I'm talking about love in its purest sort of human form, like my relationship to you, another human being's relationship to another human being. In that, we fundamentally believe that in order to be successful, there is love in there.
I found Youth Build when I was 16 years old. I was introduced to the sex industry to support myself from being on the streets. And one of my co-workers, who was also a dancer, told me about this school that she went to and how they cared about her so much. Youth Build gave me that opportunity that I never had. Each aspect, from prom to here.
When we first started working with Carmen, I think I was initially surprised at how easily she integrated right into Starbucks. She truly wants to make a change in the world for herself and for others, and quite frankly, that's what all of us want. We want to embrace the city and reflect the communities where we're working. We want to give back.
What I saw with Carmen is everybody has obstacles in life. We wanted to give Carmen that opportunity to have a fresh start. I thought, her story could inspire others.
When you hear her story, quite naturally, it's kind of like, oh wow, this was the piece you were missing, Carmen.
She's taken charge of the trauma that's happened in her life to make it a strength, that it's not just her story as a victim, but her story of growth.
Philadelphia Youth Build is the first step for these students. From here, many of them will go on to college, many of them will get into the workforce. We want to make sure that we're providing everything we can to help these young people be successful.
Where I see myself in the future, I can't even picture it anymore. With the people that I have now, that love me and support me and care about me and motivate me and push me when I can't push myself, I might be the president.
So that feels like the perfect segue actually into the conversation that we're going to have, because to kick off this conversation, I thought it made a lot of sense to start with the themes that have come up through the plenaries and through the breakout sessions beginning yesterday. And even if we just look at the plenary from this morning, we know that we were talking about what it means for our young people who have come from these adverse situations to have a loving adult be with them to help them connect back onto their path. And this video and the role that Youth Build, but also the Year Ups, and also just so many of the programs you all are working with in communities across the country, understand that so well and live it every day in your work. And so in many ways, it really does feel like the perfect segue then to hear from our young people, all former opportunity youth who have very similar stories of not just what it is that you've been able to overcome, but the role that programs and loving adults have played in helping you get onto this path and where it is you endeavor to be. So what we want to do is we've actually put together 2 questions that we're going to walk through with you all, and then we're going to walk through with the audience. Before we do that, though, I just wanted to quickly walk through some themes in hopes that as we hang these themes up in the air and we think about the conversation we're going to have regarding key takeaways, I just wanted to do some framing that helps us contextualize this conversation. So, noting that there were so many themes that got lifted up over the past day and a half, I do want to begin by saying I know I won't cover everything when I do some themes that resonated with me, but for the sake of, again, just setting the table for this conversation, the 4 that really I think I heard across the plenaries and even several of the breakout sessions include equity, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about equity. We've also spent a lot of time talking about employer engagement. We've spent a significant amount of time, and very appropriately so, talking about collaboration. And then the 4th thing I think we've heard across our plenaries and certainly in our breakout sessions is a narrative change. And again, noting these are not all the themes that have come up since our time together began, but those were some that resonated particularly with me. I was trying to really contextualize all of this, and in having a conversation actually with my team, for me, I really began to posit these 3 themes under the frame of new models. So you all may have remembered yesterday, Gail Christopher called for new models and how we approach this work. And so thinking about really new models in terms of equity or employer engagement or collaboration and narrative change, well, Well, there's just so much richness packed into that, right? So this conversation about equity, this came up earlier today. Dana, who said, you know, there really is a tension here. There's a tension around having an asset frame when we talk about our young people, and noting to Arnold's comment, but structurally, in order to be able to devise solutions, we have to structurally just understand the policies that got us here. So that's a real tension, but that's part of a new frame for how we bring equity into this work, to be able to stand the structural and historical barriers that have been at play for so long. And so as we think about new models and new approaches, and we bring an equity frame into that, then how does that inform our policy agenda? How does that inform the design of our programs? So for me, thinking about new models around equity is critical to this conversation. The second theme, again, is employer engagement. We've talked about this, and this actually harkens back to equity, but we heard Manuel say equity has to be part of making the business case. And then John Coburn also reminded us, he said, you know, when you're thinking about regional economies, bringing an equity frame into that is so critical on the employer engagement side. So, you know, across our network, we're reminded all the time of new models for employer engagement that are also thinking about equity. Even across our network of 23 communities, we have the iFoster program that's bringing foster care youth into jobs, connecting them to employers, and they're functioning as an intermediary model for how we think about employer engagement. And it's critical that we have those intermediary models, because not only do they understand the assets that our young people bring, not only do they understand the value that they can have when they are loved and when they're supported, but they can help to do that translation on the employer side as well, so that we're helping our employers understand the assets of our young people, and on the supply side, we're preparing our young people. So we need more models like iFoster, like Leaders Up, and like we're beginning to see emerge across our communities. This third piece, again, the theme was collaboration and new models for how we think about collaboration. You know, Manuel reminded us so critically that we have to start talking to unusual suspects. And I would posit that collective impact, that approach, is a new model for how we can begin to think about bringing people on the other side to the table to think about comprehensive solutions to move this opportunity youth agenda. And then the fourth, of course, is this narrative change piece. We've heard this again and again, and we know that in our work, we are telling stories all the time that are part of helping people understand, again, the assets that our young people bring, thinking about the language barriers, the structural barriers that exist, and at the heart of that is telling this story around narrative change. We heard from Travian and his model of Be Me. That's working so critically on helping people understand the values and the assets that Black men can be in their community. And everyone sitting in this room is part of the narrative change story. Again, new models for how we think about this work. So those were just some of the things that resonated with me as I've sat here since these conversations started yesterday. But I put that out there, hopefully, so that as we hear from the audience and what has resonated with you, we can be thinking about how it harkens back to some of these themes. And I welcome you all to add in anything that I didn't cover or I didn't lift up, because we want to have an inclusive conversation that not only frames our time together here since Tuesday, but when we reconvene again. And when we reconvene after that, we want to be in conversation with you all, and we want that to inform the work we do together. So now I'm going to ask the people in the back of the room if they can bring up the very first question. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to, in your tables, just spend about 5 minutes, and because we don't have a lot of time for this session, it really will probably be about 5 minutes. And the question I would love for you to reflect on is, what are the 1 to 2 key lessons that have resonated with you during your time at the convening? And then before we walk around and hear from the audience, we're going to hear from our youth leaders, their responses to these questions as well. So please take about 5 minutes, and then we'll turn back into a dialogue across the room. Thanks, Mel.